Resuming debate, the honourable member for Trinity Spadina.
Canada, with its far-flung population centres, has been compared to a string of beads and an island archipelago. And this is true today as it was 176 years ago when the first railway was built in our great country. Railways are not just a means of transportation. They tie us together at a much deeper level. Without them, Confederation would not have been possible. One of the few things that the separate colonial governments could agree on when they founded our nation was the desire to be linked and strive through the railways. The Maritimes only joined the Confederation because the building of the intercolonial railway was promised. Likewise, British Columbia only acceded because it was promised it would be connected to the rest of the country through a transcontinental railway. The fathers of Confederation grasped the immense importance of railways for such a vast and sparsely populated country. This is why Canadian governments in the past have been supportive and involved in railways since the inception of our nation. Depending on the types and location of railway projects, different approaches were taken by the government. The intercolonial railway was built under direct government supervision. Other railway links were established because loans were underwritten by the state. The most famous and important of the nation-shaping railway projects was the Canadian Pacific Railway. It was made possible by private and public funds as well as those massive land grants in the Canadian prairies. The railway, the longest in the world at the time, was completed in 1885 to great fanfare. Creating a coast-to-coast railway connection was not only an economic imperative to string the provinces together, it was also an act of nation building. The construction of railways created the economic basis for large parts of Canada. It also made our nation a diverse and striving one by bringing in immigrants from around the world as railway workers. 15,000 Chinese workers built the most challenging and dangerous portion of the Canadian Pacific Railway. Long after the transcontinental links were built, a strong sense of federal responsibility remained, especially when times were tough. When the economy was down and the supply of immigrants had dried up during World War I, the government salvaged the assets of 3 railways and merged them to form the Canadian National Railways. After World War II, the slow decline of passenger railway services began. The large duopolists did not have a serious interest in passenger lines as they focused on freight. Again, the federal government acted to protect national interest. Instead of letting passenger services disappear together under private sector management, Ria Rail was established in 1978 to ensure that passenger services would continue to connect Canadian cities. Yes, it was important to celebrate that year. Unfortunately, more recent federal governments have tended to ignore the vast potential that rail services, both for freight and passengers, hold for our great country. Under the Conservatives, railways were largely deregulated in 1987. Railway lines that were built to serve public needs with public money and land were now allowed to be abandoned by rail companies. As a result, Canada lost over 10,000 kilometers in active rail lines since then. This is a loss of almost 20% of our rail network. Another deliberate setback took place in 1995 when the Liberals, then the Liberal government, privatized the Canadian National Railway. In order to cash in on a coveted national asset, the government at the time sold CN on the stock market. The benefits of railways are clear. Trains are substantially more fuel efficient than motor vehicles when it comes to moving passengers and cargo. By electrifying railway lines, greenhouse gas emissions can be reduced. Despite the shortcomings of federal safety regulations, traveling by train is roughly 5 times safer than by using the car. Rail is still the main mode of transportation for Canadian goods. 70% of all freight in our country is shipped by rail. Rail lines provide crucial links to our southern neighbor and its important markets for Canadian companies around the world. In large urban centers, commuting by rail is vital in getting millions of Canadians to their workplace every day. Via Rail connects our country's most vibrant cities, carrying more than 4 million passengers a year. And it can do a lot more if it has the government support. Despite the impressive numbers, the picture is not so rosy. What used to be our nation's prime mode of transportation and springboard for our national aspirations have been relegated to a back row seat. Of course, the changes that the advent of air travel and cars have brought about cannot be denied or reversed, but we are foolish to believe that we are helpless and that the only modern way to move goods and people are through airports and highways. Railways can...
Order. 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 Order! Yes, there are a number of conversations commencing in the chamber, and the honourable member for Trinity Spadina has the floor. I'd ask members that wish to carry on conversations, they may do so in their respective lobbies. The honourable member for Trinity Spadina.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Railways can be competitive and highly commercially successful. CN, for example, made billions of dollars last year. What it takes is the right government mindset and political will. Countries in Europe and Asia and lately even the United States are showing us how efficient, fast and profitable railway passenger services can look like. But instead of high-speed trains that run on their own tracks, Canadians are stuck with slow diesel trains that roll on bumpy tracks that are owned by the monopolized CN and CP Rail. It is their tracks, their train control centers, and their trains that take precedence over any passenger train, a situation unheard of in countries like France or China. Via Rail is forced to lease essentially all its tracks as it's owned close to none of them itself. By allowing the big rail companies, private companies, to abandon Canadian rail lines, passengers and freight customers, they are freer than ever to expand elsewhere. And that means the lucrative U.S. market. There, CN has gobbled up various railway companies with its network stretching all the way to the Gulf of Mexico. CPR has made similar moves, purchasing thousands of kilometers of tracks in the United States to the tune of several $billions. No wonder Canadians are left behind. The lack of attention from both large rail companies results in underserved rural areas where farmers cannot ship their agricultural products, logging and mining companies that become uncompetitive as they can't ship on time, and car manufacturers whose sophisticated supply system are upended by dismal rail services. I have met many of the farming lobby groups, whether they are Pulse Canada or Soybeans Canada or wheat farmers, and they all said they lose millions of dollars because of unreliable rail services. Unfortunately, the Conservative government has only made token efforts so far to address these issues. To make the situation worse, passengers in Canada are left out in the cold as well. This government is slashing funding for Via Rail by $200 million this year, according to their own estimates. Crucial investment in overhauling aging cars and engines, as well as safety upgrades, cannot be made. The combined neglect of railway companies and the federal government has reached an unprecedented levels of underinvestment across this country. A crucial rail link on Vancouver Island that my colleagues know very well was recently shut down as it had become unsafe after years of pent-up maintenance. Likewise, the rail connection between Montreal and the Gaspé has been severed, leaving passengers stranded and a whole region cut off after 150 years of rail history. The overall service levels have decreased so much that various train connections in 2012 are slower than they were in the early 1990s. The connecting Winnipeg-Churchill train has seen its schedule lengthened by about 5 hours since 2008. The Halifax-Montreal train is now almost 3 hours slower than it was in 1993. Not very surprising, ridership have gone down from 279,000 in 1996 to 127,000 in 2010. That's more than half. Even the connections between Canada's two largest cities, Montreal and Toronto, service is now slower than it was in 1992. Back then, a train ride was just below 4 hours. Now it takes close to 5 hours. The current state of Canada's railways is made even harder by the government policies that favor air and road travel over rail. For the financial year of 2009 to 2010, all levels of government taken together spent $1.2 billion on subsidizing air travel. This number is more than twice the amount that was spent in 2001 and 2002. Likewise, government support for marine transportation increased by 90% over the same time span, reaching $1.8 billion now. And what about roads? They are our government's pet projects. All levels of government spend close to $30 billion a year on highways and roads. Again, this amount has more than doubled since 2001. Judging by the public discourse, transit is the ugly duckling when it comes to government support, but not quite. With almost $6 billion in government support, that's still light years away from passenger rail services. The rail services is treated as an afterthought becomes evident by the dismal amount of $430 million in government spending in 2009 and 2010. That's only a small increase of 12% increase in of the 2001 levels, barely enough to keep up with inflation. This new federal budget will put an X to that number, making it even lower. And more than a third of RIA rail support is expected to be chopped, along with cuts to overall rail safety programs. Without a doubt, rail transport needs to be put on the national agenda again, but not just for economic reason, but also to improve the safety and give the Canadians the confidence that they need when making the travel arrangements. As the transport critic, I welcome Bill S4 and the step forward that it represents for Canada's rail safety. I am joined in my appreciation of the Safer Railway Acts by my New Democrats colleagues. But it can be argued that it has taken far too long to get this bill at this stage, this current stage. By the time this bill received royal assent, it will be over 5 years since an independent panel made 56 recommendations to Transport Canada on how to make our railways safer. It is in the interest of all Canadians to make this bill a reality as soon as possible. The tragic RIA rail collisions in Burlington last month shows that we need to do more to prevent future derailments, fatalities, and injuries. It is time for this Conservative government to take action and satisfy long-standing demands from the independent experts on the Transportation Safety Board. The agencies have been calling for voice recorders on locomotives since 2003, and they are still not in place. More talk is not what we need. It's action that we want. Likewise, the Transportation Safety Board has been calling for automatic safety backup measures in the case of equipment failure or human error to prevent tragic accidents. In 2008, the United States acted after a horrendous crash in California. By making positive train control mandatory, the U.S. is ensuring that an automatic safety system is in place, just like the one the Transportation Safety Board has been calling for more than 10 years. Seeing the life-saving value of this technology, the experts on the board have refined the calls and have specifically demanded the introduction of mandatory positive train control in Canada since 2010. We, as the New Democrats, urge the Conservative government to heed the Transportation Safety Board request to make our railways safer for passengers and rail workers alike. To enable Via Rail to make its operations safer and to improve service levels, we also call on the federal government to reverse its funding cuts. Only by giving Via Rail the financial resources that it needs can we increase safety levels and restore Canadians' confidence in rail travel. So in conclusion, Mr. Speaker, our demands are clear. We need Bill S4, this bill, to pass. We want to make sure Transportation Safety Board's recommendation for voice recorders and positive train controls needs to be implemented as soon as possible. We have to make passenger rail services safe and reliable again by restoring Via Rail's funding. The time to act is now. By taking those measures, we continue to build on the legacy that was accomplished by our predecessors. Without the vision of this Honourable House, that famous last spike would not have been driven into the Transcontinental Railway in 1885. Let us have similar foresight in making railways a national priority again. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.